Hi, I'd like to welcome everyone to this new podcast that we're doing on GHM Academy. It's for the purpose of learning about the Olympic Games. We are here with my co-host, Sam. He's a ex-teacher that really likes history. So this is why we're together with Richard Pound today. And Richard is going to give us an explanation about the inside of the Olympics. This is going to be very interesting to have Richard with us to be able to explain to us how he sees the Olympic. And he's been with the IOC for quite a long time. He's been involved in the Olympics for a long time. And he also, I'm just going to pick up a book here that he wrote. He wrote a few books, and this one's Inside the Olympics. It's very interesting. I got to read it, enjoy it. If you have the opportunity, go and you can pick it up. I picked it up on Amazon. So, welcome, Sam. Welcome, Richard, to our series here of videos about inside the Olympics. Richard, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I started in the Olympic movement probably 70 years ago as a young, about to become swimmer, and became a competitive swimmer, went to the Olympics as a swimmer. And then after I finished international competition, I became part of the Canadian Olympic Committee. And then in 1978, I was co-opted, as they say, as a member of the International Olympic Committee. And I've been on the International Olympic Committee ever since. I've done all kinds of things in connection, principally with Olympic television and the negotiations for that, and the international marketing of the Olympics. And finally, I guess the most recent position was as the initial president of the World Anti-Doping.
Well, so I know a lot of people will be wondering, they hear about the IOC, but what does it really do?
Well, the International Olympic Committee, or IOC, as you say, is the organization that governs the Olympic Games. It's the organization that chooses the host cities, that decides what sports will be on the program of either the summer or the winter games, as the case may be, makes up all of the eligibility rules, enforces those rules. It awards the Olympic medals to the winners, and basically, if you think of things in terms of ownership, the IOC owns the Olympic Games.
Okay, so that means if basically a city wants to have the Olympic Games, what would they do? Would just basically write a letter to the IOC? We would love to have the Olympic Games. Does it just is that simple?
Well, in a manner of speaking, it's that simple. I mean, in the old days, there used to be a period during which you would apply if you wanted to host the Olympic Games, like Montreal did in 1976. We applied in 1970, and the IOC decided in 1970 to award the games to Montreal. Now we have a somewhat different process. It's a little more informal, and it allows cities that have an interest in hosting the games to explore the possibilities, to discuss them with the IOC, to see how you can make the Olympics good for the Olympics and also for the host cities. And that didn't used to happen as much as it does now. So it's an evolution, but by and large, yeah, it goes to our ability on the IOC to pick the right cities for the right games.
And when you're looking at the games, do you kind of say, well, they have to have a stadium, they have to have a place to do the opening ceremonies? How does that work? Do they have to have everything, all the whole infrastructure there?
No, normally, I mean, if you have everything you need for the Olympics before you bid, you've probably overbuilt. So it's often quite an opportunity for host cities and host countries to put in infrastructure that they need and can use after the games, but they use the occasion of the games as the focal point to get it done on time. So, in some of the major things in summer games are an Olympic stadium. Not all countries have a stadium that can hold 65 or 70,000, or in the case of Beijing back in 2008, 120,000 people. Now, if you're in Beijing, that's a different issue than if you're in Trois-Rivières, Quebec. But even so, it's even for China, it was a major undertaking.
You know, the other thing that a lot of people would like to know about is the opening ceremonies. I know that Beijing was really a big one. We had also London. You're behind the scenes a little bit there. What goes on to get something like this ready? Or, you know, has there anything ever gone wrong in these type of opening ceremonies?
Oh, things go wrong all the time. And fortunately, the television coverage is so good, you don't really realize that something's gone wrong. It's only if you're in the middle of it and you say, oh my God. I remember in Sydney, one of the final things of, you know, taking the torch up a big long tower to light it at the top, the lift suddenly went and stopped.
Oh no.
And Kathy Freeman, who was the Australian with the torch, is standing there. She's not really sure what to do. I remember looking at my Australian colleagues in the stands, and I thought, his pulse rate must be 250 at the moment, and his blood pressure is 3 million over 2 million. And you wait, and it's amazing how long a minute can be. But you know, after a minute, they got the thing going again. So there are all kinds of things that can go wrong, but you know, nothing is ever fatal. So there were a lot of, I'd say the opening ceremonies is probably the most watched event in any Olympic telecast. Everybody wants to see that, and it's symbolic for a number of reasons. First of all, you have all of the teams coming in together at the same time. So in the summer games these days, that's 206 countries, all with behind their flags, and their teams come in, and so you see all of the athletes that are going to participate. They parade, and then you put some of them in the stands so they can watch the show. And then there are a series of sort of symbolic things. You know, the athletes promise to participate in the Olympic spirit for the honor of their teams and so forth. The officials swear an oath to administer the rules of sport fairly and equitably amongst all of the different countries that are there. And then you have, you know, the Olympic flag is brought in, the traditional Olympic flag is carried in, it's run up the flagpole there. Kind of the last thing is the Olympic torch comes in, and usually it's brought by some famous athlete from the host country, and they light the official flame that sort of burns through the Olympic Games. I remember in Atlanta, for example, it was Muhammad Ali.
Yeah,
Muhammad Ali with his Parkinson's and so on, and his hand is shaking, and you're hoping he's not burning his hand as he holds the torch out to get the real thing lit. I mean, there are lots of really splendid moments there. And then when that flame goes on, the games are open. The only political speech mentioned at the Olympic Games is a one sentence thing that the head of state pronounced. I declare open the X, whatever the number is, games in Atlanta, USA. That was Bill Clinton said that back in 1996. And from then on, it's all sport. So it's really a special opportunity for the world, and of course for the athletes who are there, to take part in the opening ceremonies of a games in which you're going to compete is a moment in a lifetime that is denied to most people around the world, and most Olympic athletes only get the one chance to be there.
Wow. You know that when you're talking about the Olympics opening ceremonies, the most popular viewed thing, I know Sam has done research on YouTube, and basically the one with Mr. Bean is, I guess, Sam, right? Is that correct? The most popular one?
Yeah, you're right. I used to use the Olympics to trick the kids into learning about history, things like that. Why were there no Olympic Games from 39 to 45 and things like that? You teach them about the Second World War because there's no Olympics kind of thing. But Martin's right. I have looked up the YouTube things to see what interests students. And to my great surprise, by far and away the most popular one was the one where the Queen is supposedly jumping from the helicopter, escorted by James Bond, lands in the stadium, and comes out. And then there's Mr. Bean playing the Chariots of Fire, all sorts of things like that. And I get a surprise that by far and away is more popular than the athletes at any other Olympics. Why was that, Richard? I mean, can you say anything about that?
Well, I think it's typical. It's a typical British way of dealing with a situation. I mean, London followed Beijing. The opening ceremony in Beijing was as a matter of choreography and artistic performance and so on, was out of this world. There's never been anything on that scale ever. And poor old London is following 4 years later and saying to itself, good Lord, how can we can't top something like that. So what can we do that's particularly British? And a lot of that was to make fun of themselves. And so I remember Her Majesty jumping out of the helicopter with James Bond and had been at Buckingham Palace not too long before that, or actually it was after that, and saying to the staff there, said, didn't you people know about this? And they said, well, we saw the actor, we saw the helicopter out in the lawn behind the palace. And we thought, well, maybe the idea is to have a James Bond episode where Buckingham Palace is under attack or something like that. And the actor is there schmoozing Her Majesty to see whether she would agree to it. But they had no idea what was going to happen after that. And I remember at the ceremony when it happened, where I was seated in the Olympic Stadium was just in front of the Prince of Wales and Camilla.
Oh, you were there?
Yeah, I was there for sure.
Oh my goodness!
And so I looked around, and their mouths are wide open. And I said, "Didn't you know?" And they said, "No, he has no idea." So it was a surprise to I think all but very, very few of the organizers of the ceremony that this was going to happen. Now that was fun, and as Sam has just said. Mr. Bean is an archetypal comedian and very much identified with Britain and his he doesn't need words to do anything, and so with the camera focusing on him, sort of conducting part of the opening ceremonies, it was particularly special and very British, and the result was that you didn't end up trying to compare apples with apples. You had an apple from Beijing and an orange from London, which made it had its own particular flavor that can't be matched by anybody else.
Now, talking about flavors of different opening ceremonies, the ones that are coming up, we have COVID, right? How are they going to be doing this?
It's a good question. I mean, there are a lot of things that are in flux as we enter into the last weeks before the scheduled start on July 23rd, and I think the public health authorities, the organizing committee, the IOC, and the athletes from around the world are wondering how it's going to play out. But there will be an opening ceremony with a march, whether there'll be as many athletes in the parade as there might otherwise have been in a so-called normal Olympics remains to be seen. But there will be a parade of athletes. There will be, the taking of the oath of compliance with the rules and so on, and the officials. And the Olympic flag will be brought in, and the Olympic torch will be lit. It just will be on a somewhat reduced scale. And then the big question mark that probably isn't going to be answered until within a month of the games will be what percentage of the stadia will be filled with live spectators. I mean, the Japanese don't want any foreigners in that audience because of the COVID, but will it be 20%, 50%, 100%? I doubt very much it'll be 100%, but it would be fun to have people in the stands but it's not essential. Spectators are nice to have, but they're not must-haves. And if you think about it, 99.5% or more of the people who will experience the Tokyo Games will do so via television or some other electronic platform. And frankly, the people absorbing the games that way don't care. They're not going to see the fans. They're going to see the events that they want to watch. So, it sounds, much more important than it actually is in fact.
Well, go ahead, Sam. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, could I ask him what other opening ceremonies were sort of marked by controversy? Like this one is obviously a unique one, but what other unique opening ceremonies were there in the past that you can think of?
Well, there've been some, even in the games where I was in 1960, there was a big to-do about what we call Taiwan today. Its official designation in the United Nations, of which it was then a member, is Republic of China. Well, the peoples of the Republic of China don't like that, and they were fussing away, and eventually the IOC said that the Republic of China had to march as Taiwan. And so there's Taiwan, a sign with Taiwan on it. And then solemnly about 5 yards behind that is another person with a little thing that says under protest, which nobody noticed. And then there was a lot of controversy over at the time of the opening ceremonies in Moscow in 1980 because of the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan. And so a number of the delegations did not march. Their athletes stayed away from it, and they'd have maybe one team official behind and Britain was exactly like that. The Secretary General of the British Olympic Association marched behind the British flag, no athletes. So there are always something of that nature that go on, and you try and deal with it without wrecking the ceremony. But anyway, it's kind of they're interesting little footnotes to history that you might not otherwise realize. I remember in Montreal, for example, the teams were marching in the order of the French alphabet in Quebec. And the United States of America, the biggest contributor to the biggest team and the biggest contributor to the funding of it, was in commercial break as les États-Unis marched into the. And so you can imagine what they thought. Somebody said, "My God, there's our team," and they said, "Don't worry about it. We'll run a tape in the order that it would have been if they'd done it in the English version." So that was kind of seamless as far as an American audience was concerned, but it was a complete mess up on the part of the technical people from ABC at the time.
Wow. Now, I know there's been a lot of talking, especially in the news lately, about people protesting, and there was, I think it came out that 70% of the athletes said we should keep the Olympic Games non-political, but we've seen that in the past. I think Mexico, and there's different places, Berlin, and different situations like that have happened. I mean, those were really difficult situations for the IOC.
They were at the time. I mean, the Berlin situation is, it's pre-war, and there were a number. This was an athlete-driven boycott in Berlin, and that was protesting the fact that Jewish athletes in Germany were not treated properly. So a lot of them voted with their feet. They simply didn't participate. In Mexico in 1968, that was kind of a Black Power protest about domestic conditions in the United States. You can ask yourself whether on the world stage in Mexico at the Olympic Games that was the right thing to do or not, but it was done, and that has led to a rule that says, listen, the field of play is sacred, if you like. You don't interfere with competitors as they're running or jumping or whatever, and the medal ceremonies, which is where that's the official end of the event where you're honored for your participation, that should be free of political demonstration. There are all kinds of other opportunities during the games, but let's not mess up the medal presentations, because you're actually insulting your fellow athletes if you think of it. You know, we've all been there. These are the results. The first three are honored for medals, and you're swanning about protesting about whatever it may be that you're protesting about. It's neither the time nor the place. And I think, generally speaking, athletes have come to that conclusion as they looked at the possibility of protests either in Tokyo or at the next games in Beijing.
How have the ceremonies evolved over the years, Richard, from the very first one, you know, just pre-1900 to the modern times? How have they changed? I mean, obviously they've changed in size, but what other sort of ways have they changed?
I think the principal changes have been the designing of Olympic medals. Originally, these were not medals. They gave out trophies or other things like that. I remember the chap who won the Canadian who won the golf in 1904 in St. Louis got a trophy. Actually, quite a valuable trophy considering that it was amateur sport. I mean, the trophy was generally considered to be considerably more than the average worker earned in a year.
Oh wow!
So now we're down to medals, and they're stylized. In the summer games, there's a set piece for what goes on I forget whether it's the obverse or whatever side it is, that is sort of a classic Olympic design, and then on the other side it indicates what where the games were, what the year was, what the particular sport was. In the winter games, they don't have that set piece, so there's a lot more freedom and scope to design Olympic medals for the games. The playing of the anthems is new, or the anthem of the winner, and in some cases where there is, you know, there's a problem, as there is with Russia at the moment. There will not be the Russian anthem played. It will be a piece of music of some sort, and the Russians are trying to figure out whether it should be the Olympic anthem or a piece of music. At the moment, they're looking for some Tchaikovsky music to play if, as and when somebody from Russia wins a gold medal.
The medals themselves, they're made out of gold, pure gold, plated. I'm just curious. I know some people will be asking themselves that, you know, I got a gold medal. Is it all gold?
Well, they were at the time. I remember in Montreal at the club where I swam when I was young and had ribs. The medal that George Hodgson won, or medals, the gold medals he won in Stockholm in 1912, were actually pure gold.
Wow.
Now that was before, you know, before the price of gold was allowed to float. But so now the medals are the gold medal is silver, covered with a gold gilt. The silver medal is silver, and the bronze medal is bronze.
So you're telling me basically in the olden days, it was kind of like the jousting that they had in the medieval period when they won the trophy. It was made out of gold. They would break up the trophy and then, you know, bottom line, make money out of it. So the Olympic medals were in that style. I'm giving you a gold medal in a certain way to encourage you to keep being an athlete. Is that kind of like the idea behind all of that? Or
I think it's more the honoring of the performance, and you know, the gold, silver, and bronze has evolved as the hierarchy. I would think that if I won a gold medal, whether it was worth $25 an ounce, which was the gold standard at the time, or $5,000 now, whatever the value might be, you'd have to have a lot of guns to get that away from me. And I certainly wouldn't be putting it on the market to make a little money.
And so the idea behind the medals, how did it really come out? Like, I mean, at one point, like you were saying, it was trophies, maybe wreaths or flowers or whatever they would give the athletes. And then suddenly, when did the medals come into play?
Well, they were certainly in play by 1912, which are the ones I was just describing. But I think in inaugural games of the modern era. I think they just got the oak leaves or olive leaves headdress and maybe some flowers or something. So it would be a good historical study to see, when that happened, when the idea of a podium was developed, when the idea of an anthem to be played either as a generic Olympic anthem or the anthem of the country of the winner. Good project for students that are watching this.
Yes, Sam, maybe you can, in the next podcast, you could do some little bit of research and find out when did these games started using metals. I'd be really curious to find that out.
Oh yeah, I think the evolution of the games is it reflects major social changes and things that happened in the past. For example, the exclusion of women, things like that have all changed. One of the things that interests me is that the 1936 games, of course, one reads different accounts, one about athletes giving the Nazi salute. I don't know if the various teams all did that. I have no idea. But secondly, Hitler's treatment of Jesse Owens is different views on that. Do you know anything about that, Richard?
Well, at the time, the Olympic salute was a raised arm as well, and a lot of the athletes.
Wait! I want you to repeat that. I really, it was a salute.
Yeah, no, the Olympic salute was a raised right arm.
Wow.
Which preceded Herr Schicklgruber, and so I know that the Canadian flag bearer, who was a colleague and actually a McGill graduate, gave that salute, thinking that he was giving the Olympic salute, and then that was kind of appropriated by the Nazis as recognition of their salute.
That's so interesting.
Yes.
I would have never, honestly, I would have never really thought of that in a million years, that salute was an Olympic one. It's amazing how history, Sam, you know all about history a lot more than I do. And that things change, right, in history, and to hear that's very impressive.
Oh yeah, there's a great deal of controversy about the various teams that didn't give the salute. And there's all, some books say the American team and the British team did give the Nazi salute, but your explanation, they were giving the Olympic salute, is a very different one to, it's often interpreted. Obviously, the 36 games were really interesting because of what happened afterwards, because of the thing. Right. And so, but there's a great many myths surrounding. What other myths are there, Richard, in the Olympic story, if you like, that are worth investigating?
Well, myths, it's hard to say what are myths. There are evolutions but I'd say most of the evolution has been on the field of play, rather than in the committee rooms and the smokers, where all the important people decided how the world would be run. The Olympic athletes were generally pretty removed from all of that, and didn't care so much about those frills as they did about the competitions.
And when we were talking about athletes, right, and the preparation of the game again, with the IOC, you don't have a choice. You got to get it right. I mean, if someone's swimming, 50 meters, and at the end, the timers are very precise. I mean, we're talking about sometimes 100th of a second, and then you look at all the athletes say, "Oops, sorry, the timer didn't work." I mean, you don't get a second chance at this. You guys have to do it really, really good. That must be a lot of work.
That's a lot of work and a lot of angst for the organizers, and then there's a lot of redundancies that have to be built into the system so that it really operates on a no-fail basis. I know, for example, it's so important these days that the television signal get out, that there's actually a separate power supply for the international broadcast center, so that if the Tokyo grid goes down in a nanosecond, the other grid is in place and there's no interruption of the power. So it's very important. And you can't, as you were saying, you can't say to Usain Bolt, "Gosh, that was a terrific race. I mean, it was magnificent. You were fabulous. But would you mind doing it again? Because I'm sorry, our timers failed." And so you just can't have that kind of issue. A lot of other stuff can be covered up. I mean, I'd say if you were watching the Rio games on television, you'd have had quite a different perspective of those games and how smoothly and seamlessly they were working, compared to if you'd been in Rio and saw the total chaos from beginning to end.
Interesting.
Where, if you were looking at the schedule, you say, "Well, I thought there was supposed to be a field hockey game on this time." Instead, you're watching the basketball game. That's because the field hockey venue failed. They couldn't even have the game at the time they advertised it. But because of the broadcast complexity now, you simply put in another event in that place and say, "Welcome to the team handball event." I thought it was going to be field hockey. No, team handball. Look, it's on television. So, but no, Rio teetered on the brink of catastrophic failure every single day.
Okay, so Rio was one of the games that had quite a few failures. Is there any other games, or is there sort of a redo moment? Kind of like you were saying, Usain Bolt runs the race. Oops, sorry, we got to redo this. Did that ever happen?
No, you can't really redo it. I mean, how often are you going to run 9.6 seconds for 100 meters? But so that's why you simply have to get it right. And so my guess is there were probably 300 cameras on both, at the time you ran that race, so that if your main camera failed, you had all kinds of alternative things, and the timing system as well. So that's the sort of thing you do have to get right. And by and large, touch wood and all that, we've been either really good or really lucky so far.
So logistically speaking, how many people work to prepare an Olympic game?
I would say you're probably looking at 100,000 or more, between the people who build things, the people who operate them, the people who stage them, the people who do the officiating, the crowd control folks, the security folks, transportation folks, volunteers.
Wow.
It's and security, of course. It's a big and very, very complex operation. In a sense, it's a shame for a number of reasons that we had the COVID-19, because had the games been held in 2020 on schedule, they would certainly have been the best organized games in the history of the Olympics. The Japanese organizers were superb, and frankly, it would have been the second time that Japan amazed the world. In 1964, Japan did not have a great reputation in the sense of precision optics and all of these sort of things. And when they put the games on, it was a whole new paradigm in organizational excellence, and that would have been surpassed in 2020. So, in the sense of whatever has to be done to make the Olympics work, the Japanese, they've got their number one team on this, and I think probably only Japan in the entire world would have been as well organized so as to be able to postpone this for a year. Nobody else could have done that, and it's a tribute to their organizational skills that we're even contemplating games in the next couple of months.
Yeah, so when you're looking at a delay of 1 year and you have 100,000 people helping to organize an event like this, this is like you said, it's a massive undertaking. And now you're asking them to do it not just once, but in a way twice.
Oh, it's really like stopping the Queen Mary in mid-ocean and say, count to 20, count to 12 months, and then start the engines again. And so they had to make all kinds of arrangements with the presumptive owners of all of the facilities, stadium and things like that, who'd already made plans starting in 2021, because those facilities would have been delivered to them. They say, hold it, we can't do it in 2020. You're going to have to put things on hold for a year, and then you'll get them, a year after you expected. Same with the Olympic Village, and all of those, the transportation. They hire thousands and thousands of buses, often from all over the world, to deal with the Olympic traffic. At the time, in Vancouver, I remember in 2010, I was talking to a bus driver who came from Sydney, Nova Scotia, and he had driven his bus from Sydney, Nova Scotia, all the way to Vancouver so that he could be part of the Olympic transportation system. Nobody has enough buses to take the Olympic surge of passengers that have to be got from their hotels to the competition venues, back to their hotels, and so forth. So, it's a very, very painstaking organization for sure.
As a viewer of the games, we forget very quickly how much infrastructure, how much logistics that is needed to run one of these games. I mean, that's impressive. And I like that story, just Vancouver, so people understand where Sydney, Nova Scotia is. It's literally across a full continent. And if I'm correct, it has to be at least it's a nonstop 3-day drive.
And not if you're observing the speed limit, it isn't. No, I'd say it's the best part of a week to get there and back.
And that's to get a bus in Vancouver for the Olympic Games. Wow, right. That's impressive. That's impressive.
Yeah. So, Richard, over the years, then, how has transportation changed the games? I think it's a good point about buses being used, but obviously around about 1900, they didn't have the same sort of transport infrastructure. How has transportation altered the games over the years?
Well, once we figured out how to harness steam, transport by land improved by leaps and bounds. I mean, between whatever the 1820s or 30s and the time of Julius Caesar, you couldn't move large groups of people any faster than Julius Caesar could. And now all of a sudden you've got trains that are reliable and can move at relatively high speed. Shipping, again with steam, you were no longer at the mercy of the vagaries of the winds, and a transatlantic crossing, say from America to Europe, they could have lasted anywhere between 30 and 60 days, depending on the winds, was down to 10 days, and then down to 6 or 7 now. And eventually, and that took even longer, the airline travel, sort of post-World War II, shrunk the world even more. And now, when I go to Tokyo in July, I'm going to be there 13 hours after I leave Montreal. I mean, it's almost inconceivable what those advances have been. On the spot, not quite as much, because the distances are smaller. You got more people, so things like buses and trams and metros, add to the speed and efficiency of getting people from point A to point B. But it's on a world scale, and that's one of the reasons that the Olympics was such a breathtakingly audacious undertaking when it first started. Imagine having international sport where countries could compete against other countries. It was all very well in England or something. You could have Liverpool and Manchester, having games because you could get crowds from there to there. But international was really, really ambitious and paid out. I mean, imagine the founders of the IOC back in 1894 looking at what it is today. They say, my God, we never thought it would be anything like that. But isn't this splendid? And that would be the unanimous conclusion.
Wow. So like Sam was saying, so transportation in a way had a big effect on the Olympic Games in the matter of being able to bring athletes there. But in the other sense, because the Olympic Games are all done in one specific area in a venue, the transportation was less an issue or a problem.
Yeah. Actually, transportation did, even pre-Olympics, the fact that games could be played between teams in different cities required that all of the rules be harmonized, because every game had its local peccadillos, and so in the sort of the 19th century, the second part of the 19th century in particular, lots of work was done to standardize the rules in all of the sports and to write them out so that everyone played the same game according to the same rules. And then that made the internationalization of it that much easier.
So is the IOC part of that to create these rules, to make sure that all the rules are standardized across the world?
It would have worked. The IOC would have worked with the outcomes of those standardization processes. They were done essentially sport by sport. So the rules for rugby or football or baseball or whatever it may be would all have been worked out between the folks that play those different sports. Then they'd agree on a set of rules, and then the IOC would adopt those rules for its games.
So just give an example. I'm just going to take an example. Let's say hockey, right? It's very popular in Canada, even now around the world, or even it could be football or soccer, depending on which country you're in. They basically would talk to an organization that has the rules and say, we're going to go with this specific organization. And then everyone that plays or comes to the Olympic Games must follow these specific rules from this specific organization. Right.
And so to take your ice hockey, we have to say ice hockey, where in Canada, we think hockey is the word. It's not. But in ice hockey, say, all right, we agree it's going to be 3 periods. There'll be 20 minutes long. There'll be an intermission of whatever it is between periods. These are the fouls. These are the penalties that will apply in each case. And so that becomes the new rule, and everybody will play by those same rules.
How does the status of a sport change if it's accepted or not accepted as an Olympic sport?
The basic problem is that the Olympic Games have to be manageable, and so they've got to have all of the sports on the program are competed in, and they have to be wound up within the 17-day period of the games. So there are lots of sports that would like to be on the Olympic program, not only for the publicity attaching to the sport, but through the television, sharing in the revenues and so on. And so we have at the IOC, we have what we call a program commission, which looks at the various applications that come in and so forth. And there are tweakings of the program from time to time, adding new sports and dropping others. Tug of war was one of the original Olympic sports, and it was on for 2 or 3 games and then was dropped. But we've added, modern pentathlon. We've added triathlon. We've changed some of the yachting events have now become sailing, and you don't have the big, huge, heavily crewed boats and so forth. So that's an evolution designed to recognize that the games are universal and therefore have to be accessible to athletes from 206 different countries without enormous cost. One of the variations, for example, in swimming was they had these suits that were sort of made of sort of artificial scales that were, if you wore them, if you could get into them, they cost a couple of $1,000s each for one wearing. Well, that's really not accessible to somebody from a smaller, poorer country. So the swimming federation said, time out. You can't wear those things anymore. And so that's forever being tweaked. So the status, it doesn't change the games. There are lots of very fine games and sports that are not on the Olympic program. There just isn't room. And I remember one of our presidents said, think of the Olympic program as a bus. The bus is full. If anybody else wants to get on, somebody's got to get off. And once you're on the Olympic program, you certainly don't want to get off. So it's a difficult process.
Yeah, I'm thinking more of a game like seven-a-side rugby, which was not really a major sport before it was in the Olympics, but now it's a huge sport. Apparently, it's the fastest growing sport in the United States. Seven-a-side rugby has been worldwide now. Just because it was an Olympic sport, it was confined to just a few countries, but places like the Fiji and that, who were very good at the seven-a-side rugby, who actually won the first gold medal, didn't really take part much in the Olympics before this. But the impact of it being recognised is huge for seven-a-side rugby. I don't know about other sports.
Yeah, well, it's kind of an anomaly, because if you play the traditional 15-a-side rugby with say 16 teams, it would take a month to run a tournament, because you can't. These big beefy guys can't play an hour or whatever it is every day. The great thing about the rugby sevens is that you can schedule matches 30 minutes apart.
Yes,
it's a very consumer friendly operation. You get all of the excitement and the full pitch and all that, but you don't have to watch for 2 hours, and you can have a coffee and there's another game on in 5 minutes afterwards. So it's become very popular because of that, and as you mentioned, Sam, the fact that a lot of the Polynesian countries that otherwise are not major medal threats are now in the mix, and it's another way of emphasizing the universality of the games to make it possible, not in all sports, but in some sports, for even small countries to aspire to gold medals.
That's a really interesting view of looking at things. It's not just a matter of technology changing speeds, like this swimsuit you were talking about. Most people think, oh, it's because people are swimming too fast. It's also an aspect of accessibility, such as the great example that Sam just gave about rugby, right? That's a great example, because if you had games that were 2 hours long, then your players wouldn't be able to have tournaments with multiple games. So you have to not just consider speed or new world records, but you have to consider athletes' capabilities, accessibility to the sport, and these different things. That makes it a total different view of looking at things. And this is what also the IOC does. It kind of looks at this in a general way, say, this is not going to quite work in the Olympics because you can't have this many games in a row. Is that something that is taken care of by the IOC, or also taken care of by the federations that you work with?
The federations are slower to react. I mean, sport has changed adverse. I mean, it tends to be conservative. And we've always done it this way, and But the IOC said, well, look, rugby. We appreciate that rugby has a considerable following in almost all parts of the world, but it's not feasible nor possible to have a competition of any significant size. I mean, you could maybe have a 4-team competition if it was only a couple of games over the 17 days. But you say, on the other hand, you've got a variation of it, which you've been experimenting with, of 7-a-side in a short game. That opens up the universality aspect that we can consider. It also makes it possible for women to play, and that's a balance that we've been seeking now since 1896 to achieve. And I'd say in Tokyo, it's going to be basically 50-50 on the field of play, the same number of women as for men. Been a long-term objective. We haven't got the same participation, around the governing tables yet, but at least there's some improvement on that. So that would have been a feature in a lot of the winter sports. And this, we had two things that worked there. One is that the winter games used to be shorter than the summer because there were only 6 sports, and the program was a little bit thin. So as we started to examine the Olympics and the consumption of them by today's audiences, we found that we weren't reaching the younger demographic as much as we had hoped. So that led to two things. One was including things like freestyle skiing and snowboarding and snowcross and events that appeal to younger athletes. It also beefed up the program so that we could have enough to put on 17 days of events. So starting in Calgary back in 1988, we extended the Winter Games to the same length as the summer. And that's been a huge success. So these are all factors that go into the decisions on the Olympic program and the admission of new sports, and we don't have polo matches anymore, where all of the rich guys bring their 7 ponies, and it's that doesn't work. It's not aligned with the values of universality that we espouse. So this kind of an evolution continues to occur. We've seen in events, the styles have changed extraordinarily. I mean, if you go into our archives and look at how the high jump used to occur, from the old scissor kick to a Western roll to the Fosbury flop, and huge stylistic and performance enhancement. The swimming races are quite different from what they used to be. When I was swimming, you dove in and you started swimming. Now you dive in, even in the 100 meters, you do 25 meters just butterfly kick, before you even start to use your arms and shoulders. So the swimming patterns, the breathing patterns, all of these things have developed, and with them, performance has increased. So it's an ongoing empirical research to improve performance by natural means as opposed to unnatural.
This is so interesting to see how sports are selected. Often we think, oh, they're selected because they're very popular, or basically they weren't that popular when people were watching the games. But it's actually more than that. It's really based on the fact that it's to get accessibility so more people can have access. So when you're talking about the ponies, right? Let's be honest, polo it's a super popular sport, but it's not the point. It's not very accessible to everyone compared to football or soccer, right? Which we call European football or soccer. That is, you have a ball and you kick it around, anybody can play, right? So it gives that accessibility. And even swimming is, it's a bathing suit. Mind you, there's a lot of involvement. You need a pool, which is expensive, but still these infrastructures, you can create them and build them in a lot of countries. So people do have accessibility to these type of sports. I think that's great. I was just going to make a comment about BMX, the X Games, all of this. And when you were talking about the youth, I guess that's kind of what you did. You saw the X game and said, hey, these are interesting games, not games, but interesting sports. And you wanted to just kind of bring them along. Is that kind of how did that work out?
Well, you sort of look at who is watching these sports, who is participating in them.
Yeah.
Are they fun to watch? Are they too dangerous to bring on a worldwide basis? If not, maybe they can be adapted to the Olympics. But you don't want to do something that's so dangerous that most of the winter sports, if you're not doing it properly, you can get killed or seriously injured, as we know. So you've got to build in the safety factors, and I mean things like that. There are limits on what materials you can use on ski racing costumes. These really slick things that if you fall, you're going to end up going as fast as you were on the skis because the lack of friction. And you'll see if you ever look at the I think it's Nagano Winter Games. There's somebody called it the Herman, the Terminator. He went through 3 separate snow fences when he fell, but because of those safety measures, he was racing again 2 days later, as opposed to being wrapped in plaster forever.
Wow.
Richard, is there a sort of status hierarchy at the games? I mean, do some sports, for example, are team sports, athletes in team sports less valued than individual athletes? Is there any status, or are they all sort of more or less equal?
Well, the team sports compete as a team, and they I think they often resent the fact that after playing for 17 days they get 1 gold medal, whereas a Mark Spitz gets 7 gold medals in swimming, because there are a whole bunch of events that are reasonably close to each other in terms of the skill and stamina demands. There's some hard feelings about that, but no, I mean, I think if you're there in a team sport, that's the way it is. So you've got handball and volleyball and football and all of these sports. They're happy with it. And I remember volleyball, when I came back from Munich in 1972, I'd been the assistant chef de mission of the Canadian team. And the next games were in Montreal in 76. So all my friends are saying, "Oh, what ticket should we buy? Gymnastics, swimming, track and fields." And I said, you should think about volleyball. And my friend said, "Volleyball?" I said, "Trust me, what you think you played in high school as volleyball is nothing like volleyball played at the international level." And I must say, for my money, the volleyball finals in Montreal were some of the most astonishing and exciting events I've ever seen.
Who was in the finals?
In the men's, in particular, it was Poland against the Soviet Union.
Oh, that's
and
interesting.
Guess who won?
Poland?
Poland. No, it was a really hard. It wasn't quite as bloody as the water polo match back in Sydney when Hungary played the Soviet Union, and the pool was filled with blood from all of the punching and scratching and biting and God knows what else they were doing. But it was a very meaningful competition.
Wow. Talking about team sports, we can't get away from now talking about professional athletes coming to the Olympic Games, because that happened, and that was kind of, let's just say not everyone agreed originally. How did that come about?
Well, the sport in the sort of the late 19th century, early 20th was kind of captured by a crowd that believed in a mythical amateurism that they said existed in ancient Greece, which it didn't. But the true blue amateur was the only way to go, and they held on to that. I mean, I remember, as late as 1960, when I was training for the Olympics, I could not take a job as a lifeguard at a pool because under the amateur code, that made me a professional. And somehow, if I sat out in a hot sun trying to keep kids from drowning, that gave me an advantage in swimming, which I never understood. But I wasn't going to rock the boat and miss the Olympics. But anyway, eventually, we started to work towards a variation on those rules. A lot encouraged by the East Bloc countries, because they didn't have, or said they didn't have, professional sports. And I'd say by 1977 or so, the word amateur no longer appeared in the Olympic Charter. And so you had this kind of goofy situation. You don't have to be an amateur. You just can't be a professional. You say, oh, come on, give me a break. What is the difference? But anyway, we gradually worked toward that, and it was very interesting. The first dream team in basketball, that was was in Barcelona.
Yes.
And the NBA allowed its players to participate, and more importantly, the International Federation of Basketball had come to the conclusion that you could watch Michael Jordan films until the tide came in, but you'd never have the experience of playing against him on a court. So they said, but if we're all going to get better, the rising tide, let's allow the professional players to play, and we'll learn from them. And sure enough, everyone said, well, the Americans are going to win all the time. They said, yes, probably, for a while. And in Barcelona, the Americans won. And it was very exciting to see, because normally there's a lot of, bad mouthing, between basketball teams before the games start. And not here, that I forget who was in the finals in Barcelona, but they were all, and when they introduced the team, they all ran over to have their picture taken beside Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson and so on. And so in 1992, the U.S. won. In 1996, at home in Atlanta, the U.S. won. In 2000, in the finals, the U.S. was in the finals. It was behind at halftime, and it was behind to France.
Whoa!
Think about that. So they won, but in 2004 in Athens, the U.S. didn't even get a medal. And so in the meantime, the basketball around the world grew up and expanded its capacity beyond what anyone had imagined. So now it's kind of anybody's a game in these international tournaments.
Well, I guess it's kind of like ice hockey for Canada, right? We kind of did the same thing. We thought we were going to win the medals all the time, right, for ice hockey, and then suddenly all these countries are kind of growing and the same thing.
And yes, they purported to have the amateur rule still in place, and so they said, the Soviet Red Army team is not a professional team. The Canadian and American teams are, and so Canada actually boycotted Olympic hockey for a couple of Olympics, protesting against that interpretation. And no, really, I think we went 50 years between Helsinki in 52 and Salt Lake City in 2002 before winning another gold medal. And then we had a pretty good run for a while. And our women have had a fabulous run since women's hockey was added in 1998. They've had, I think, 2 silvers and 4 golds, I think 4 in a row. Remember, I saw our team one time before Salt Lake City, and I said, "How are you going to do?" And they said, "Oh, we feel pretty good, although we've lost the last few games to the U.S." And I said, "I'll tell you what, if you guys win, I'll present the medals." And so they won, and I presented the medals. So I actually, for a period of time, from '98 to 2012, I think, no Canadian woman hockey player got an Olympic medal except for me.
Yeah. Could I ask, what about nationality, Richard? You mentioned hockey. I remember reading that the first team to beat the Canadians at hockey was actually a British team, but the entire British team had been born in Canada and they declared British nationality. Or they'd been in Canada and they learned their hockey there, but they were actually more Canadian than British, but the Brits being nationalistic. What about rules for national, what country must one be from to take part in the Olympics?
You're meant to be a national of the country, which is in normal parlance, that would be a citizen.
Yes.
And if you're a dual, you have an American parent and a Canadian parent, you can choose whichever you want. But once you've chosen to compete for country A in international Olympic hockey, you can't change without the permission of your National Olympic Committee, the former National Olympic Committee, the International Federation, and the IOC. So it keeps, some of the countries like in the Gulf that could hire all kinds of athletes. Say if you land at the airport, you get automatic citizenship and you can compete for us in the Olympics. And so you want to avoid kind of a supermarket of Olympic athletes that are for hire.
Really, thank you, Richard, for being with us. We're going to be doing a lot of these videos together, and I hope our listeners are going to enjoy these stories. Definitely, thank you, Sam, for your comments. They're awesome, and we'll be talking to you soon, Richard, to go over more of these wonderful anecdotes, these stories, these behind the scenes. And I invite all our subscribers, or invite all the listeners, to write your comments if you have any ideas of things that you would like to hear us talk about, or Richard, or any questions for Richard. Please do so right in the comment section. Remember to subscribe to the channel. It helps us, press that bell for getting the notification, and also that like button. All right, thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.